Bienvenue tous. Welcome to Reporters here on France 24. In this edition, we take you to Santiago, Chile, where the people are about to take part in a historic referendum on changing the constitution. Laws set in place under the dictator General Pinochet, laws that still remain. This vote comes in the wake of a year of protests that at times was violently repressed by the security forces of the current president, Sebastián Piñera. Well, our reporter is Ingrid Piponio. She joins us now. Why specifically, Ingrid, do the people want change?
So what started this nationwide unrest last year was a massive rejection of the current system. Because as you said, Mark, Chile's constitution has not changed since the Pinochet dictatorship that ended 30 years ago. And this constitution was designed to ensure that the neoliberal model established by Pinochet would not be challenged by future governments after the return to democracy. But the result of this model is that Chile is now the seventh most unequal country in the world. So people are mainly protesting against social inequality, homelessness, mass unemployment, extreme poverty, but it now also includes police state repression, which has seriously injured hundreds of demonstrators over the last year, as you will see in our report.
Ingrid, thank you very much indeed. Let's take a look then at the report by Ingrid Piponio and Paul Cabanis.
On the 47th anniversary of Augusto Pinochet's coup, protesters gathered in front of the presidential palace in memory of the thousands of political opponents who were murdered during his regime. Among them, a new generation of victims. Some of them have lost an eye. More than a dozen of them were in the crowd that day. Nicole and Jose both lost an eye when police opened fire with pellets during the demonstrations that have rocked Chile for a year. Nicole, a photographer, lost the vision in her left eye 8 months ago. Even though she has a press card, the police don't allow her to film.
We're filming a documentary.
Even if you are a photographer, you have to leave.
These policemen intimidate us and chase us. Look, I'm shaking.
In 1 year, 468 people have suffered serious eye injuries from pellets fired by riot police. Jose is one of the most recent victims. He lost his eye 2 months ago. They chose this symbolic day, the anniversary of the coup, to call for an end to the legacy of the military dictatorship.
What we're experiencing now is a repeat of what happened in the past in our country. The Never Again slogan never worked. Once again, there are serious violations of human rights.
Those blinded during the demonstrations have become symbols of Chile's mass protests, living proof of the state's violence against its own citizens. Jose is an electrician who lives on the outskirts of the capital, Santiago. He has no history of protest. But 2 months ago, as he was cycling through his neighborhood near where protesters had gathered, he was blinded in his right eye when he was hit by a pellet.
A member of the military pointed a gun at me. I was there on my bike motionless. He took his time to shoot. Not only did his shot blind me, but it also broke my tooth, cut my lip, and broke my nose.
Bloodstains are still visible on the road. Jose was shot without warning, even though he did not pose a threat to the military. 2 months later, he's still struggling to deal with the trauma.
It's a really painful memory.
He's unable to work because of his injuries and has so far received no compensation from the Chilean government.
What happened to me could happen to anyone in the neighborhood. It's despicable to know that every day more and more people are losing an eye. To know that these soldiers and police come into the neighborhood to attack people who simply ask for dignity, nothing but dignity.
The protests over the past year have been unprecedented. People have taken to the streets en masse to denounce the neoliberal policies imposed during the dictatorship, when public services like health, education, and pensions were privatized. The sky-high private costs have left the middle class massively in debt.
Our public schools lack everything. The power goes out all the time, and there's not even enough paper to do the assignments. It's not fair.
When people took to the streets, the police responded with force, provoking violent clashes. When outnumbered, the anti-riot police shot into the crowds. 31 people have died, and the bullets have injured more than 2,200 people. With the spread of COVID, major protests have been banned. And Chile has restored the state of emergency and imposed curfews. In the low-income suburbs of Santiago, the military is omnipresent. This is where Nicole lives, the photographer who lost an eye in the protests. She's one of the few victims who dares to seek justice. Here's what her eye looked like a few days after she was hit.
It's not pretty to see.
9 months later, she still suffers from post-traumatic stress.
I can't see anything out front. It's all dark.
On New Year's Eve, an anti-riot bullet hit her in the face as she was about to cover a demonstration. Those who rescued her filmed the aftermath. That night, in the same neighborhood, in less than an hour and a half, 3 people lost an eye.
These policemen saw my camera and my microphone, yet they shot on purpose with the intention of hurting me. Unfortunately, it has become a repressive technique to aim at the head and the eyes, because it really works if you want to immobilize a protester for the rest of their life.
Of the 468 half-blinded protesters, only a handful have had the courage to tell their story publicly. They have become the faces of the campaign to change the Constitution.
My name is Fabiola. On November 26th, Captain Maturana shot me in the head with a tear gas canister, and I lost both my eyes and my sense of taste and smell. I demand justice. This referendum belongs to the people. I support it.
After the filming of this video, Fabiola had to be hospitalized after a serious relapse.
Hi, it's good to see you.
Nicole, the photographer, has come to support her.
Vamos a seguir luchando y vamos a dejar todo en la calle para que la impunidad no siga pasando y no se perpetúe.
This is the video of Fabiola's attack filmed by the police. It leaked on social media and caused outrage across the country. The police officers are heard congratulating each other as they fire tear gas, even though their own security protocol doesn't allow its use. The authorities suspended one of the officers, but he remains free. The state has failed to hold the police accountable. Only 3 officers have been convicted for causing serious eye trauma. The Chilean police refused all our requests for interviews.
We do not have a spokesperson available to answer your interview.
The police have the support of some members of parliament from the ruling Renovación Nacional party. Conservative MP Diego Schalper is a member of the Human Rights Committee. He doesn't understand the campaign to change the constitution.
I think that the question today in Chile is not whether there have been human rights violations. The question is, should Chile completely rewrite its constitution to meet social demands?
Under pressure from the massive protests, some members of his party are calling for a vote in favor of this new constitution. But Schalper is against any reform.
I reject this change. Gradual, responsible, and moderate reforms are needed. Some say that in Latin America, there are either military dictatorships or revolutions. I hope that moderation will triumph, that we won't have the constitutional revolution that extremists want.
Yet today, more than 60% of Chileans say they are in favor of changing the constitution. Women are leading the way. A group of them are meeting today in front of the National Stadium of Santiago, which is notorious for having served as a makeshift prison camp during the military coup. Thousands were imprisoned and tortured here. Their protests have gone viral on social networks. They see the referendum as an opportunity to end conservatism in Chilean society.
For us, this is an extremely important moment to continue the fight and make our voices heard, because the referendum is coming soon. We will have to vote for a change in the constitution to include indigenous peoples and women.
Three of them, a student, a businesswoman, and an engineer, agreed to meet us, but they remained masked for fear of retaliation. They're aged between 20 and 30. This gesture, a hand on the eye in solidarity with the blinded protesters, has become the symbol of their protest.
The criminalization of social movements is terrible in Chile. We even pay the consequences at work.
The police film us, and if we show our face, they identify us and they can arrest us.
Feminist collectives, even the most famous ones, are persecuted in Chile. Las Tesis, who came up with this global feminist anthem, made it to Time magazine's 100 Most Influential Personalities of 2020. But in Chile, they're being prosecuted for posting this video last June.
All cops are bastards. Y los pacos nos persiguen, lanzan gases, golpean, torturan, violan, destruyen, nos ciegan.
It was largely due to police repression that people went out to demonstrate in massive numbers.
Today, a large majority of Chilean society is calling for a change in the constitution, with more equitable access to health, pensions, and education. Sectors that have been privatized for over 40 years and services are too expensive for the middle class. All three women have racked up huge debts to finance their education.
I had to take out a loan to pay for college, and on top of that I had to work so that I could eat, because my parents couldn't help me. All the money they earn goes into food, rent and water.
Our goal now is to change this constitution.
Chile is at a crossroads. Despite the pandemic and repression, major protests are planned in the weeks to come.
Our reporter Ingrid Piponio is still with us. Ingrid, thank you so much for that report. Fascinating insight into what's happening in Chile right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic still. COVID-19, I can only imagine, has helped the authorities with their job of trying to clamp down on protest.
Yes, indeed. The protests have been brought to a halt in March when President Pinochet-era announced a ban on gathering of 500 people or more to contain the spread of the virus. And it was the first time since October 2019 that the Plaza Italia Square, it's the main square where the protests happened in Santiago, it was the first time that it was seen empty. And the government even took this opportunity to reform the square, reform its monuments that were plastered with graffiti calling for his resignation. But despite the strict quarantine that was going on in Santiago, protesters have found alternative ways to restlessly campaign against the government, like, for example, helping unemployed citizens affected by the pandemic. So let's listen to what they have to say.
The state doesn't care about the working class. Due to the pandemic, many people have lost their jobs and can't feed themselves. So we, the youth, have redirected our protest actions into gathering food and redistributing it.
It isn't much, but it comes from the hearts. These young people are fighting for us, the old and the sick.
This is our voting advice. I approve a new constitution. We want the rich to stop getting richer. We want health, education, and a dignified retirement.
I cry the state doesn't care about the working class. It's quite a common thing these days. And we see there, Ingrid, from your reporting, people very angry and motivated to get the change that they want and pushing to reform the constitution. I wonder if you've got a sense, a very clear sense now about what will happen next. Will these people get the change that they want? Will it be repressed by the authorities? What do you think?
So what we see at the moment is that after an imposed truce due to the coronavirus pandemic, just a few days ago, another episode of police violence seems to have unleashed a new wave of unrest in Santiago. A viral video showed a policeman pushing a teenager off a 7-meter-high bridge onto a river. And ever since, there have been protests every day on the Plaza Italia Square in central Santiago, just like we were seeing before the coronavirus pandemic, with the same violence. And these protests will probably grow over the next few days with the anniversary of last year's unrest coming up. So at the moment, it isn't clear if the upcoming referendum is going to calm things down, because apart from new constitution, Chileans are also calling for the resignation of President Pinochet-era and justice for police abuses. But for example, out of 468 cases of people that lost an eye, only 3 police officers have been sanctioned.
All those people being maimed for life and so few people being held to account. Those statistics, Ingrid, really speak for themselves. Ingrid Piponio, thank you very much indeed. The report by Ingrid and by Paul Cabanas. You can see it again, of course, on our website, france24.com. Just look for Reporters, click on that. This is Reporters on France 24. Do stay with us, but most of all, stay safe.